Good evening. Welcome to the front porch with United Capital Management. And this evening we are interviewing Patricia Trompeter. Trompeter. I say that right?
Yep, you said it perfectly.
Okay. And she is the CEO of Sphere 3D. Ticker symbol is ANYNE. And I need to make known and do the disclaimers. We are not here to give investment advice this evening, nor recommend a stock, even though we're going to talk a little bit about Sphere 3D. So, Patricia, you want to start out to giving us your awesome background, and maybe we should start with how far back do you want to go? Age 15? I want to start out with you. We're number 23 of 26.
Back to birth. Okay, I'm going to do this very quickly in the New York
Fashion.
speed.
And
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, number 23 of 26, foster kids, first one to graduate university. Let's see, what else? Chicago is still my hometown, even though I'm very much a New Yorker. And I went straight out of college from Marquette University to where I'm still very active at the university to General Electric, GE. I worked at GE Capital and GE for over 17 years. Uh, Doing mergers and acquisitions in their finance and a ton of different roles from financial planning and analysis to CFO of a division, and I did corporate turnarounds both at the capital and corporate level. So under Jack Welch's tutelage, he ran the company at the time. So we all worked for him, but it was great working for him. And then I took a short break to take care of some sick relatives, and then went out on my own. And I do corporate turnarounds. I sit on boards. I get hired by private equity, family offices to sit on boards of their investments, usually ones that aren't doing so well, to kind of help them along, offer strategic advice, maybe do help them do capital raises. And sometimes, on occasion, as in this case, I step down and take over as the CEO. So I've been the CEO for a little over a year of Sphere 3D. We are a Bitcoin miner. We have about 1.5 exahash, which is a measure in the industry of how much computing power you have, and that's it. So
okay, I've got about a dozen questions to ask you within those statements. Before I ask about Jack Welch, let's back up a little bit. When you said you're the first in your family to graduate, are you talking the foster family, the 23rd foster child out of the 26 in that family? You're the first to graduate or go to college?
yeah, so I'm the first. So my parents had 26 foster kids. We were all named for the alphabet. And some would get adopted. So my parents ended up adopting they adopted my sister, my brother, and then they adopted the hard to place kids. So, for example, I was a mixed race baby in the 60s. My sister, right above me, when her birth mother was pregnant, she had epilepsy. So she took a drug named Delanton and left my sister severely cognitively disabled. And so I'm her legal guardian. So there's various stories behind every single child they adopted, but each one had issues on why they didn't want to get adopted. People didn't want to adopt them. So out of the six that they actually adopted, I'm the first one who graduated from college.
All right.
So
So this is almost biography worthy. Your life story is amazing. So, what are your three fondest memories of Jack Welch?
oh my
Or one?
gosh. The first time when I met him, we were I was brand new to GE. You're like 22, 23 out of, straight out of college. And, you're just there to conquer the world, and you have life hasn't tarnished you yet. And, we were in this round table, and he said, how do I get more diversity? And so we started talking about, how do you get more women? And he said, and at this point, I'm not even thinking of having children. And he said, one of my biggest challenges is that women in GE, after they leave, and again, you got to remember this is the 80s, they don't have, they leave and they don't come back, and they stay at home. And I'm like, well, why don't you put a program in place? And I remember everybody turned and looked at me like, did you actually just yell that at Jack Welch?
As in
And
a child care program, is that what you're thinking?
yeah, or just like a program like I'll work, we didn't necessarily have Zoom,
Yeah.
so work from home was like something different. But and so he said to me, "Well, I'm interested in your thoughts." So that's one of my favorite memories. Um, Another one was I was working down the hall from him, and you just hear him
Before
screaming.
we go on, you tell
Yeah,
a young woman, young man, a person that wants to excel in life, the lesson learned there is just speak your mind respectfully. That's all you.
yeah. I mean, honestly, one of the biggest lessons in life, that I learned out of my success, and why I think I did so well at GE, was you have a there's people who go out and they're asked an answer, and they come back with answer A, B, and C. And then there's the people who say, okay, I'm going to look at A, B, and C, and I think Chad's going to ask, I know he asked me for A, B, and C, but he doesn't know it yet, but he's going to need C and D. And you go and you do that, and I've got the answer to the question before you even know that you need that answer. So I think those are the people that are really successful, and I think GE teaches you that skill set. So, um, you know, he was a great mentor. I had great mentors all through working at GE, and I think the culture at that time was just phenomenal. So
And you started to tell another Jack story. I think you were getting ready to.
now I forgot which one it
Okay.
was. I've got he was. I was working down. I mean, I had a tiny little cubicle. He had these two giant offices. And it was, I don't know, 7 in the morning, and he's walking down the hall screaming, can't find anybody. And so he walks up to me, and I'm like, at that time I was on the audit staff, and he looks at me and he's like, you, can you calculate numbers? I said, oh yeah, I have a background in finance. And at that point he doesn't care. Like, I start going in like, and I graduated and I've got a high GPA. Didn't care. And he goes, get in my office, work with me. And all of a sudden I'm sitting in front of this man, and I'm like 24, 25 years old. And he's like, okay, numbers girl, run this number. And I'm like, freaking out, because this guy was a scion. So at the end of it, I walk out and he goes, numbers girl, well done, forget about it. Later, I see him maybe 2 years later in a meeting, and he goes, numbers girl. And that, like, ended my career, because well, to me it ended my reputation, because at that point Rain Man had just come out,
Okay.
and so everyone's like, oh, Rain Girl. And I was like, oh god, no, that's like the worst thing ever. And everyone's like, hey, Rain Girl. So he's a funny guy. He's a funny guy. The rest of the stories, I can't, they're not PG, they're not GPG.
Okay.
So he has colorful language. Let's leave it at this. He has very colorful language, and I found it very hard in meetings not to giggle at some of the things that
Okay.
he would
So
say.
first lesson, speak up. Not that the podcast is about this, but second is, hey, you were there at 7 a.m. and you were there when he needed you. And so if all my employees could hear show up early at work, yeah.
No, the answer to that one is take the opportunity. Take the opportunity to excel at something and give somebody what they need, and just be
Right.
there. Be there when the opportunity is there, and raise your hand and say, okay.
Okay.
I mean, it would have been easy for me to say, let me get someone who can do this, right?
So by the way, I met Patricia at the AC Wainwright conference in New York when we were able to, Tanner Jackman and I were able to interview her for 30 minutes. And it was a very well spent. And we're so glad we chose to do that. So I knew a little bit about this, but how did you go from the numbers girl, you had being pointed out being the numbers girl, to being the only non-family member to speak at his funeral? That'd be a long journey.
That's a long story. He was a great mentor to me, and I have to say, Jack becomes a dad, right? He's a dad to all of us, and I think he's a great. I miss him. I'm going to choke up here, so we're going to have to move
Yeah. Well, I will.
past that one.
Uh,
But I think I think it's interesting, because I think in a leader, to find a leader that just inspires you to just find the answer to something. You've got a problem, and it was almost like a loyalty where you didn't want to let him down. You know, and that's the thing, and it's funny because I was talking to one of my colleagues who works for a very large investment bank, and he called me one night at like 8 o'clock, and he's like, I just had a whole bunch of kids who walked out at 5 o'clock and said, I can't figure out this problem. And they left. And he said, can you imagine having done that at GE? And he was never at GE, but we worked together while we were there. And I said, I can't, because you just had this loyalty to finish something. And I think, part of that's also the Midwest character, right? And the way you were raised.
Yeah.
So,
I was down with an illness recently for the better part of a week. I
mm,
usually drag myself into the office, but that's kind of frowned upon now when you walk into an office facility
oh,
coughing
yeah.
and hacking and sneezing. So I stayed home and worked from home, but got some rest over a couple weekends in a row. And I managed to watch two or three seasons of Suits.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I thought about that, what happened to the day when you could walk into the office and see people working at 5 a.m. and leave at 8 in the evening. And I don't know, this country's work ethic's changed a little bit.
Yeah.
All
And
different.
listen, I'm going to admit that I'm also on the, you know, if you're doing a spectrum here, I'm on the spectrum of crazy. I mean, my first daughter, or my first child, I had her, and I was in the middle of doing a deal. She came early, and I don't know, 9 centimeters dilated. I said, I'll be back. I was on a call. I said, I'll be back in 45 minutes. I've got to have this kid. And everyone laughed, like, okay. Hung up, and I was back on the phone. Same thing with surgery. I had major surgery in 2021, and the next day I was on the phone, and everyone's like, "Oh crap, we didn't know you were on the phone, and you were going to be on the phone." I'm like, "Well, of course." And I'm like, "Let me guess, none of you did anything that I asked you to do." I'm having surgery this Wednesday, so I warned everybody I will be on the calls on Thursday. From the hospital in my gown. I'll turn the camera off. I admit that's why I'm crazy. My older sisters will tell you that's also why I'm single, but I'm happy. I love my work. So
Well,
for me,
you work as if you own the place. It's that's very evident.
I do.
And so the let's talk about corporate turnarounds and specifically Sphere Three. That's a tongue twister. You
Yeah.
want to go right into that, or did you choose the blockchain Web3 space, or did it choose you kind of by default the road you're on, or were you able to pick that off a shelf and say, "Hey, I want to be in the Web3 Bitcoin space"?
So it it chose me. And there was an investor who asked me to sit on the board. Spear 3D was in data mining and cloud storage before the big guys were. Google and Amazon came in. Spear 3D got clobbered. You can't compete with them. And so basically, we transitioned into Bitcoin mining, data mining, etc. And it was an interesting time to get into Bitcoin mining because it was when everybody was getting into it and you couldn't get machines and you couldn't, get your hands on anything. And so we transitioned in, and then one of the larger investors asked me to sit on the board,
What
assist
year
with the
was
transition.
that? Sorry to interrupt. That you transitioned. What year would you put that
I
on?
joined in May of 2021.
Okay,
I joined the board.
that's when you joined. But when did they enter the Bitcoin mining space, or is that the time they decided to enter it?
So the decision was made in, I think, February or March
Gotcha.
to enter the space. They looked at doing a merger, a reverse merger. It ended up not working out, but they went through all of the machinations of going through the merger itself. And then we had come into contact with a very large contract that was below market. And so when China was rehoming their machines, so we took a look at it and said, hey, maybe the merger doesn't work. Went to our merger partner. As you revalue, you go through a merger process, you continually revalue, and as a public company you have to say, is this the right thing for my shareholders? And when we couldn't get a hold of machines, it absolutely was. And then we came back and said, well, now we can get a hold of machines. The merger consideration is probably not what it should be. And we just, parted ways. So, got all the way down the altar with the merger partner and just decided, mutually that this wasn't the right thing. So we went off on our own. And for a whole host of reasons, my predecessor stepped down. I took over. And a month later, the market crashed. So it was the craziest thing on a Friday afternoon. I was sitting there with two term sheets for a couple hundred million each in debt, trying to, let's play the bankers against each other. This one's got too high terms. This one wants this. And, within 2 weeks, the whole market had turned upside down. It was this unbelievable trifecta. You could not have asked. The three key things are the price of Bitcoin, which plummeted.
Mhm.
The price of energy went through the roof because oil went through the roof, and then access to capital, and the market had just dried up because the Fed decided to then raise rates higher and faster than they had since the 80s, which we all know what happened then. So it was crazy. In this below market contract that we had that was amazing, all of a sudden crossed the Rubicon in June, and I had to negotiate out of this contract for a couple $100 million worth of equipment. And the interesting thing is, there was $60 million of penalties if you canceled the contract. So it took me a good couple of months to negotiate out of that, and not get the penalties, not get the $60 million of penalties. So it worked out in the end, but it wasn't. I think I lost sleep and got gray hair during that time. So, um, but now we're in great shape. We've got no debt on our balance sheet, and a couple things I have to solve, and we're in good shape.
So, where do you go from here to the point where you can talk about it? What are you excited about when it comes to Sphere 3? Uh, Bitcoin halvening coming up in April.
Mm, I know. Well, so we know that. Look, we know what happens in the happening. This has happened, every 18 to 24 months. Which, coincidentally, if anybody says to you, "Oh, Bitcoin, the market's so volatile," the business cycle for Bitcoin is 18 to 24 months, whereas the business life cycle for most regular businesses is 5 to 7 years. So so of course Bitcoin and that market would appear to be volatile with such a short time frame. But if you take what has happened over the last halvenings, we see that Bitcoin drops. We know it's going to drop anywhere between 4 to 6 months. The price will drop a little bit and then it goes straight up. I think the first one, it rose like 3,000%. I think this last time, the last halvening, it was 600 or 5 or 600%. Don't quote me, or don't say, oh, she's wrong, because I'm doing this off the
I
top of my
can
head.
I can give those to you exactly if you want them.
Well, there you go. I know you probably know them better than I do, because I'm like, I'm looking at reports all day. But in any event, so we know that we need to grow, and everything's on the table, whether it be a merger, whether we acquire someone, whether we're acquired, whether we just acquire more exahash. So we're evaluating all of those opportunities now and taking a look at what makes sense, for to prepare for the happening. So
To the extent that you can, when did the light bulb come on in regards to Bitcoin, Ethereum, Web3, what this world is? Uh, do you date back? It's amazing. If you date clear back to 2013, you're a long-term veteran. You're not going to meet very many people that understood it in 2000, at the end of 2010, and Satoshi Nakamoto and all that. I think it's Hal Finney. I don't know if you have an opinion, but did you have to get versed in this, or did you come in knowing?
So I had always kind of been on the fringes of it. I wish I'd been in 2010 and 2013.
Mhm.
I wish I had been, but I was kind of on the fringes of it for quite a while. Like I'd read the articles, etc. But I really got into it when I took the board seat. I had a lot of prep for the time beforehand and researching it. But look, I'm a student of money. We went from salt to shells to
Hmm.
carrying around clumps of gold, and then we said, oh, let's make this gold into something easier to carry, into coins, and then everybody went crazy when we said, oh, in the 1800s, when we said, hey, these coins are too heavy to carry around. Why don't we print paper money? Everybody, lost their walnut. Well, you can lose it and it burns and whatever else. And then, we took it off the gold standard in 1972 and went, oh my gosh. So money's always had this. I've always been interested in it, but money's always had this. Every time we bring something new in, there's always a resistance to it, right?
Hmm.
You think about the last time was making paper money, and now, of course, everybody has resistance to this because it's Bitcoin. And it's like, well, there's nothing to touch. And so, I always say, well, okay, but think about the last thing you bought. You bought groceries, you paid for them with a credit card, you paid your credit card online. It's a digital transaction. So you never actually touched money to buy groceries or go to Target. So, it's the same thing. And they say, oh, well, it's tied to the US dollar. Well, Bitcoin is interesting to me because a, it acts like a fiat currency, right? Because you can pay for things in it. You can trade it like an equity.
Hmm.
Um, it has a whole bunch of derivative instruments, but it's really a commodity if you think about it in the definition, the legal definition in the financial markets. So, to me, it's very interesting. Like, where does this go? And there's a finite number. So in I think 2040, there's no more. So what happens to it?
Hmm.
How do you trade that? And the important thing then is going to be, you aren't going to earn money by mining Bitcoin or winning Bitcoin. You're just going to earn it in transaction fees. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens because it'll be scarce. And as we all took business school, the scarcer a resource, the more expensive it is.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, you can read different opinions and hear people talk about, but 21 million coins, 19 million of them mined. I think the last number I heard was something like 123 years before I
yep.
always say before the rest of the transactions are solved. Um, to me, this whole industry is built on a lot of confusing terms, probably originally put forth to help educate the public, but I think it's just confused them. It's
Oh yeah.
easier to call it money or crypto, but now it's really a decentralized, consensus based asset ledger. At the end of the day, it's nothing but pure data storage. I often refer to Bitcoin as data storage and Ethereum the processing for people to understand this. But, you know, what it's going to do from a technical standpoint, the ability
Mm,
to, all this AI, all this advancement in synthetic biology, if they don't find safe places to store data and
yeah.
decentralize it, then it doesn't come together very well. So, anything anything more you can tell us about, even though I didn't want to interview you specifically for this, and I'll remind you we can cut out anything that you don't want. But the as far as any goes, that's pretty intriguing. Um, and would you rather acquire or be acquired, or does it matter? Was that too much
Mm.
of an aggressive question?
I'm not sure I'm allowed to answer that as
Okay.
a public company. What I will say is my background is in acquisitions.
Hmm.
So mergers and acquisitions. So listen, it depends. The smaller guys, I think you're going to see post halvening, you're going to see a lot of consolidations of companies.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of miners that their cost to mine a Bitcoin is a lot higher or at the amount of the Bitcoin. I think there's a lot of guys, there's like, three or four really big guys that can swallow up half the market. So, you know, to me, it's either I'm going to have to acquire a lot of little companies or I'm going to have to go merge with someone or just add a whole bunch of machines. So, like I said, it's all on the table. I have my preferences, but I can't say that because I think my lawyers would kill me. So,
um, the I think if I pose this question in the right way, you could probably answer it.
mm.
But because this is really just for fun, but was the motivation of ownership to get into this space to acquire and keep? Was that a big motivator? Hey, the best way to acquire Bitcoin is mining it, not buying it, and we better grab what we can while the getting's good. Is that?
Yeah, and look, at certain times, not necessarily last year, when Bitcoin is rallying like this one, and I haven't checked in a little while, but it was at like 34,000 and some change. Your cost to mine is it depends on the miner and the efficiency, but it could be anywhere from like 13 to $20,000 depending on the size of the miner, etc. So, and our cost is somewhere in there. um which is a wide range. So, most of the miners you'll find in a bell curve fall in that amount. So as long as Bitcoin is, going through the roof, so for example, just an example, let's just say in theory that it costs you 14,000. I'm doing this for easy math.
Mhm.
If it costs you $14,000 to mine a Bitcoin between your cost of energy and whatever else, um, then you're making $20,000 for every Bitcoin you get.
Mhm.
So it makes sense on a daily basis. You're earning X amount. So
Yeah. So
anyway,
very, very interesting. So one last question. Uh, have you found this space intriguing enough that you'd like to stay in it, or will you just go wherever you're called to go after this
oh, that's
venture?
not fair. Okay, can I qualify that with it depends on what happens with the company, but I do. What I find interesting is fintech. So I do find Bitcoin interesting. To answer your question, short answer. Again, it intrigues me, and what I really like is blockchain and fintech, because I think there's so many adjacent industries and AI and Web3. You and I have talked about Web3. There's so much coming on the market that it's just so exciting. And so I have a couple of things to say on that. Is that one, I love the fact that blockchain, there's no one who owns it, right? And it's just collectively, we can go out and develop these technologies that you know make everything a lot easier. So to me, that's very, very interesting, and I think that's the way to go. I think it's reckless when people say, "Oh, you could, use Bitcoin to pay for, you know." drugs and ship them in from China, or say, hey, you could pay for a hit on the dark web. Well, okay, you can, but I can tell you, if you can find out who owns that wallet, you can, each Bitcoin, you can tell who did that.
Mhm.
It's almost like as if you said to Chase Bank, we're going to take everybody's account number and all of their transactions and make it public. So as soon as you find out that Chad is account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I know every transaction you've done. So I find it almost naive when people say, oh, Bitcoin's used for, money laundering, or it's just stupid. Those people are stupid when they say that. Or you know bringing fentanyl in from China. Like, I can't think of any a dumber thing to say. So that's one thing. Sorry, I'm sure I'm going to get a call from her office tomorrow. And then the second thing is, what I love about fintech is it's moving so fast. What I'm seeing, being part of Marquette University and co-chairing their applied investment management, is no longer, 800 years ago when I went to school, it was like, okay, here's accounting, here's how you debit and credit stuff. They're actually teaching the kids the skill set, because you can't teach them the technology. The technology's changing too fast. What they're teaching is the skill set to be able to understand that technology and apply it to the next thing. And I'm watching this and thinking, oh my gosh, this is the wave of the future. So, we're still understanding the base of accounting, debits and credits, but we're teaching that analytical skill set and how to apply it. if that makes sense. So that to me is very intriguing, especially with this new generation that's coming out of schools. So,
I told you we'd keep you make this very interesting and 10 minutes long. We're almost 30 minutes, but
oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
no, it's all
I talked too
my
much.
fault. But Patricia, I'm hoping that you can, no pressure, but if you can join me and my client some evening for a live Q&A, that would be fantastic, and we'll give you the date. We'll do
I would love that. As long as nobody asks me hard
we'll do it
questions.
some
That's
month
fine.
when the weather is bad outside. So
Perfect. Sounds great.
thank you very much, and we will see you next time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.